Hi there everyone, my name is Christopher Ryan. I am a student in HSCO 508, and this is my walkthrough of my PowerPoint presentation on interpersonal communication as the final project for the class. I've appreciated the last 8 weeks in the semester that I spent doing the work. Quite a bit of learning and understanding. In particular, as a physician, what I found most valuable was to take the opportunity to do a little more personal introspection into the way that my behavioral mix impacts the way that I work, not just with my patients, but also with my colleagues and coworkers, and how my communication style obviously impacts my home life. So for those reasons, I've chosen to focus on something in particular that I've looked at as my long-term goal, and we can get into that here shortly as we move through the presentation. So next slide. The first introductory slide is a little bit of information about me. I'm a Midwest kid, born and raised here. I live in Rockford, Illinois now, but went to high school just outside St. Louis, did most of my medical training in Chicago. All of my family is here in the Midwest, and the values and approach to life that people from the Midwest have are something that I appreciate and I think does impact the way that I communicate. I have an amazing partner, my wife Elizabeth. I have a beautiful little boy named Connor, who also challenges me on a daily basis to be a better communicator, to be more honest and open in my communication, and certainly calls me on the carpet at times when I fail to communicate the way that I ought to. I am a resident physician with Swedish American Hospital here in Rockford through the University of Illinois at Chicago's Family Medicine program. My focus is in rural medicine support, and that is something I'm deeply passionate about, and another reason why I'd like to focus a little bit more effectively on the type of communication that I do, in particular the softer side of my communication. We'll talk, like I said, a little bit more about that. I'm deeply grounded in my Christian faith, and feel that the strongest and greatest communicator that I can think of who would behave and work the way that I would like is Jesus Christ. And for that reason would like to model my communication after the way that he approached his critics, the people that he cared for, and his fans. Beyond that, something that really defines me is my sort of lasting commitment to education. I have a bachelor's degree in political science from Quincy University in Quincy, Illinois. I did my post-bac in chemistry at the University of Missouri, earned my master's in business administration, my MD degree, and as you know, am now working on my MHS. And am closing in on finishing that process. So education, medicine, family, and Jesus Christ are sort of those things that really define me and built me in this Midwestern environment. Next slide. So my overarching goal, this sort of lifetime goal that I have for myself as a husband, a physician, a father, is to work to remove the barriers that prevent me from being able to engage in the highest levels of empathic communication. I've spent the last 33 years of my life developing my education and my relationships with the people that are part of my life now. What I need to do is be able to tear down some of the baggage, some of the bad habits that I've developed that keep me from being able to work as an empathic communicator effectively. With those hurdles that I could remove, I'd plan to maintain a deep level of empathic communication style with my patients, with my loved ones, and with those that I work with on a daily basis. The goal here was, and really sort of the self-reflection that I developed through this course, was understanding that empathy and sympathy are not the same thing, and really being able to draw a stronger line there, and then to incorporate my understanding, particularly in my medical role, of what suffering is and how I approach that as a provider and as an empathic communicator. Next slide. So what's helping me, what's hurting me? Here are my sort of pros and cons list that I see for myself in achieving this goal. So I think on the positive end, and we'll start there, is seeing Christ as my example. I sort of talked about that a little bit already. Through Scripture and through prayer, I can see the way that Christ would ask me to communicate, and he certainly set a wonderful example of the way that we can communicate to those around us, regardless of the situation. This isn't a picky, choosy kind of thing. Christ worked ultimately the same way, whether he was talking to someone who was spitting in his face or talking to someone that he was healing or working through. whether he was working with his disciples or a stranger on the street, it didn't matter. His communication style was authentic, was filled with love, and was clearly developed in a way that would reach into the hearts of anyone that he came into and in contact with. And that's ultimately my goal with the type of communication that I would want to do. I have a great deal of exposure to opportunities that would require empathic communication. While certainly I think all of us have times during the day where we might have the chance to try to get on somebody else's level or understand where they're coming from, in the medical environment, nearly everyone that I come in contact with is stressed out, worried, scared, has bad news being delivered, has good news being delivered. But in any case, there's an opportunity through that communication to deepen the level of empathy that I have in that. And I see that as a strength, as the opportunity that while it's an area that I really do feel like I need to improve on, I have the chance to do that just by volume alone. The next positive that I see in myself is my education about how and when to apply that empathic communication. And I think that really has been developed through my time in the course. Through the readings, I've been able to see the appropriate times that it's called for to, bring that empathic approach to the communication that I'd be having versus times where sort of the nuts and bolts of the situation, whether it's the science of the medicine, the reality of the next procedure, the logistical plan for how we're going to deal with Christmas in my household, whatever it is, all of those types of situations don't necessarily require this deep introspective approach towards empathic communication. Sometimes we're just going to say, well, we're going to grandma's house at 2 o'clock today. We're going to have dinner. We'll be back by 9. That isn't necessarily a place where we need to apply an empathic communication. But ultimately, this course has really shown me where those lines are and how to develop those boundaries of when it's appropriate and necessary and when we can probably go into cruise control a little bit more and be safe about it. And finally, I think one of the most important pieces of my communication approach and the positive side is that I have a sincere desire to act as a resource for my patients, for my family, for the people that I work with, to advocate for them as a human being. And while I wish more of my colleagues believed that way, perhaps they're jaded, perhaps they're distracted, perhaps sin is in their life and it's keeping them from being able to see their role that way. But ultimately, that's the way that I view what I need to be doing, and I think that's a strength. On the negative side of what I'm doing, the things that are holding me back, my DC personality mix, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Being in a medical environment, while it does give you opportunities to be empathic, it certainly also desensitizes you to some of the suffering and hurt that are going on. And then my physical and emotional exhaustion that comes with being a resident, working 16, 18-hour days, can cloud your judgment at times and can take those skill sets away from you, whether you like it or not. And I think that's something that's dangerous, or could perhaps be dangerous as far as my communication is concerned. Next slide. So talking about those negatives still and getting a little bit more in depth about my personality mix, about my behavior mix. My blend includes a C, so we've talked about this. It's competent, cautious, calculating factor. And I think as a physician, this is appropriate. We want our doctors to make sure that they know what they're talking about, to think through all the data and to make a strong decision. Unfortunately, what that does is it creates negatives where you can do overthinking. Sometimes you can't react at the appropriate time, again, because you're sort of dragging your feet to make sure that you believe the hypothesis that you've come up with. And then again, more than that too, you might even withhold responses until you're able to get more data to be more clear and sure about what's going on. Now, the D side of what I do, this demanding sort of leadership-based side, again, seems like on face that it would be an appropriate way for a physician to behave. You want to make sure that they're confident in their decision making, that they know how to develop a plan and execute that plan. The issue with that is that you can develop tunnel vision, you can alienate patients, family members, other coworkers because you're so sure of your plan, and then you can develop a certain lack of engagement in the suffering of the patient. And that's something in particular that I wanted to focus on because of a sort of poignant moment that I had with the course in dealing with suffering, as we discussed in some of our discussion board posts. So next slide. The strategies that I've sort of developed through the course to overcome those barriers, those issues that can come from my working and home environment, and certainly from my particular personality blend, is that I need to have more mindful interactions. I need to know coming into a situation that I am attempting to be empathic. I want to open up my heart and head to those concepts and ideas that I'm working with my patients. Deepening my understanding of empathy versus sympathy, and oftentimes, not wanting to feel what they're feeling, sympathy, can sometimes lead us away from empathy, where we understand and we are just going to sit and be on their level with them as they're dealing with whatever issue it is. Now, maybe I've never lost a child before, so I'd want to stay away from that discussion because I don't want to feel the hurt of what it would feel like to lose a child. Unfortunately, that's the wrong way to approach a patient who's maybe going through that. That you don't have to have lost a child to understand what it is to see a person hurting and to be a resource for them to feel better. I think that explaining my blend, particularly to my family and to my coworkers on the front end, people that I work with and deal with on a regular basis, so that they know that I'm mindful of how I behave, and so that there's a level of comfort for them to approach me and say, Chris, I feel like maybe you're dragging your feet a little bit. Let's be a little bit more decisive. Or with my D side, to say, Chris, it's okay. You can share this burden, this responsibility of what we're doing moving forward. Prayer is obviously always something that we can do to improve ourselves, and it's something that I do on a regular basis and plan to continue to do. Reflecting on interactions where I could desensitize myself. I use this example of a woman losing a child. I could turn away from that experience and I could try to put it away so that I don't think about it. So I desensitize myself to that pain. But I think that sometimes sitting in that hurt broadens our empathy. It gives me the chance to see what this woman felt like and what she was going through during her situation. And then I can take that opportunity to strengthen sort of my experience with empathy and suffering and move forward. And then finally, accepting suffering and allowing myself to understand its place in medicine and the human experience. So I'm built to heal people. I've been taught to know the answer on how to take something away from someone that's hurting them. And that can sometimes lead physicians to think that way, that that's the only way that we can behave. So ultimately what I need to do, and this is sort of this aha moment, this light bulb moment that I had in the course, was say that it's okay to suffer and that this is going to be a part of it, and that as a physician, as an advocate, as a provider, I'm going to sit in that pain with them. I don't need to experience the pain, but I need to be right next to them while they are and be that resource for them. Next slide. So there's a really great discussion now that's happening on empathy in medicine, and it's something that's been going on for a while, but ultimately empathy as part of medicine is being defined as having an emotive, moral, cognitive, and behavioral component. And each one of those has a separate definition. But that empathy is more than just sort of this simple concept that we see it as. And this particular explanation was really powerful for me. That behavioral empathy consists of the ability to convey this understanding to the patient through one's words and actions, so that it's not just your experience, but also, and particularly in this communication opportunity, the chance for you to explain to your patient how you're on their level and the way that you're experiencing empathy with them. Next slide. So suffering and empathy, these two things have to go together, particularly in a medical universe. But suffering with a patient can be an expression of empathy. And this is something I get, this sort of slide by slide has been this continuous theme. This was a revelation for me, and it was an opportunity. My professor actually said, hey, why don't you just let them hurt? Why don't you let them suffer? And why don't you suffer with them? And this is something that's sort of counterintuitive to the way that physicians approach concepts like this. And so for that reason, I had to take a step back, and that one message is something that's really transcended the rest of the class, and I hope I'm able to express it clearly to you guys how much this is going to be a part of my practice going forward. The other issue with suffering and empathy is that you can fail to account for the empathy gap that's created by focusing on your behavioral blend. And so if I'm thinking about being direct and I'm thinking about being correct all the time in my answering, and I'm really focused on the medicine, I can leave that human experience behind and walk away, and that's where that empathy gap exists, where I'm not providing that human touch to the medicine that I'm serving. And then the final thing is just ultimately that I need to be okay with suffering, and this is something that I'm going to struggle with. It's something that I'm going to continue to work on in my communication, because your knee-jerk reaction as a provider, like I said, is to take the pain away. And sometimes it simply isn't the opportunity, and sometimes it's simply not the right answer, that the emotional hurt needs to be dealt with more than that physical hurt. Next slide. So this slide really is a great explanation of what suffering is and how it's a multidimensional problem. And for that reason, a Tylenol isn't the only thing that's going to take care of it. And really I just want to focus attention on the very last few sentences, that in this system many avenues exist by which a person might suffer, only one of which is physical. And this again is, I'm trying to change my paradigm and shift the way that I think about suffering. That, like I said, it's not just physical, but if I'm going to really be an honest provider, if I'm going to be an honest caretaker of my patients, of my family, of my coworkers, that if they're hurting, it's not just pain, that there's more to it, that it could be a broader issue that I need to approach and dive more deeply into with them through an empathic communication style. Next slide. I think that through scripture I can also support my approach for my OAG, and that to believe in my heart that I should and will express empathy in my communication. It means that in reality those aspirations would take hold of my communication style. So thinking that I can be empathic and approaching myself that way, it will be. And Proverbs 23:7 says that a man thinketh in his heart, so he is. And I think that in my heart and with the grace of God, that the direction of my goals like to add this empathy into my communication, and my desire to care for others can offer that type of care, and so it will be a reality because I believe it to be. Next slide. Here are my references. Ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate the opportunity to work with you today. I hope you took something away from this. I certainly did, and will look forward to continuing maintaining the kind of empathic communication style that this course has helped me develop.